Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another FS Club webinar. Today, we have a joint webinar between Amsterdam and London, and we're going to be talking about Beyond Brexit, EU-UK Social Security Contribution Rules. Now, you might think that this was an arcane area, but it has been growing in importance, most particularly over the last 6 months, as people are beginning to realize some of the complexities involved, particularly on employment and Brexit. And today we have two experts with us, Jeremy Edwards, who's a partner from Baker & McKenzie here in London, and his colleague, Don-Tobias, who's a partner at Baker & McKenzie in Amsterdam. So welcome to both of you. Now, the audience, you'll know me probably. I'm Michael Mainelli. I'm one of the directors of Yen, and it really is a privilege to be able to introduce these webinars, principally because our sponsors are a very tolerant group and allow us to range widely and freely across technology, economics, and finance. And today, of course, is an important session on what it means to employ people across Europe post-Brexit. And it's done in association with one of our knowledge hubs, the ESOP Center, the Employee Share Ownership faction of Life, who are really quite concerned at making sure that employment is effective and also fair. We'll be talking today for about 20 minutes with our experts presenting. We've reserved, as ever, for 20 minutes for questions and answers. And my job really is to get out of the way as quickly as possible. As you know, we like to get to the meat of the matter, so I won't be introducing Don-Tobias or Jeremy in detail. You've got that on the website. The slides are posted. The recording will be up in about 48 hours. And yes, please do ask questions. And would you mind doing so through the GoToWebinar question and answer facility? That's just simply type the questions in, and I will feed them into a conversation with Jeremy and Don-Tobias at 11:25. If you email me questions, WhatsApp me, Signal me, etc., I will receive them, but unfortunately after the session because I'm here with you. So with no further ado, I'd like to hand over, if I might, to our team to get cracking. So gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. So if you could go to the agenda slide first. So today we're going to take you through an overview of the new social security contribution rules that apply between the EU and the UK post-Brexit. And when we first suggested this webinar, we were facing a nightmare scenario of a no agreement with the EU, and there was confusion among social security authorities as to the rules that will govern, and importantly, the basic procedures that would apply post-Brexit. But better late than never, the UK and the EU finally agreed and published their cooperation agreement on the 24th of December, meaning people like me had to look over it over the Christmas period. And there's been further clarity on the practical steps that need to be undertaken since then. So really the good news is that there is a framework now in place to prevent double social security contributions, and there is more certainty as to the practical measures. But we're not completely out of the woods yet. There's still confusions about the types of social security contributions at the margins that apply under the protocol. And the new rules, and especially the practices and procedures, do need to bed down a bit. We're still at the risk of individual authorities coming up with strange views on things. So what we're going to do today is start by giving you an overview of the new Social Security Protocol. We'll then talk about transitional provisions, i.e. what happened to arrangements already in place before the 1st of January 2021. Go through some practical planning points, talk a little bit about the differences between Switzerland, Norway, and Iceland and the EU rules. And then we've got a Netherlands example, followed by the Q&A. So we promise not to talk too long today. So next slide, please. A poll. We just want to find out where you guys are at the moment in relation to planning in relation to social security contributions. So does your company know what it is to do when sending an employee over to an EU jurisdiction on secondment? And please suggest yes, not sure.
So I've launched the poll, Jeremy. Half the audience have already voted in 15 seconds. Just give it a few more seconds to close. We're well up over 70%, and I'll close the poll in another 3 seconds and show you the results. And here they are. So 60% effectively are not sure, which is certainly where I stand. Back to you.
Okay, so the next slide, please. So really, when I look at this, I think it's amazing, isn't it? Here we are in the beginning of the Brexit rules, and 60% of you are saying we're not sure, and a huge majority are going to go no. It's quite an extraordinary situation to be in, and we're sort of 2 months in now, so it is worrying that. But anyway, you've come here, and we're going to put the light back in on the procedures, hopefully. So first of all, the overall overview of the new Social Security Protocol. So the overall aim of this protocol is to prevent workers from having to pay double Social Security contributions. And basically, the basic principle is that the workers will be subject to the legislation of only one state, determined in accordance with the protocol. And the protocol is sort of following the existing EU social security regulations in place, though there are differences at the margins, especially taking into fact we're not actually in the EU. But what I think you need to know at a high level is that there is a good framework in place now to stop double social security contributions. Before Christmas, I was actually worrying that actually there could be double social security contributions, not so much about people posting into the UK, but more into the EU, because they were, the EU jurisdictions weren't going to give up easily, and unless there was a protocol in place, they weren't going to say there wasn't double social security, whereas the UK was a bit more flexible. So what I want to do first is, because there's been so much rumour going around in terms of where we've got to, I thought it would be good just to go back over what was concerning us, especially before Christmas. Well, no social security agreement and double social security contribution liabilities. On the whole, that's now sorted. There is a framework agreement and there's more procedures in place. So you shouldn't really have too many positions where there is double social security. Yeah, there wasn't a social security agreement. We'd have to work out what the old archaic agreements were back to probably the 1950s and 1970s. And not every EU country had them, so we don't have to do that now. So that would have been fun. But as I said before, no one really knew what the procedures were going to be. But actually, by February, I think we are pretty much there. And then a sort of exportability of benefits and aggregation of benefits. Actually, aggregation first, actually periods of insurance under legislation of one state are taken into account when you're in the next country. So that is good news. And also exportability, it's there as well. So so when you export your benefits, they're not actually reduced as a result of going to another state. But there are aspects which aren't covered by the framework agreement, and that includes sort of family benefits, social and medical assistance, special tax contributions, cash benefits, compensation benefits, and things like cold weather payments. So it's not 100% brilliant, and we'll come on to that. And actually, we've seen a case recently where the French authorities, having signed up to the EU Social Security Protocol, have come a little sting of the tail before New Year, where they have special social taxes in France called the CSG and the SRDS, for EU residents they're charged at 7.5%, but they're actually trying to charge UK citizens for these social taxes 17.2%. This probably is going to be a subject of litigation, but so there are differences at the margins. So can we go to the next slide, please? multi-state workers, so people who are working in two states simultaneously. And the basic rule under the Social Security Protocol is that the person pursuing an activity as an employed or self-employed person in a state is subject to the legislation of that state. But what happens if you've got multi-state workers, which is increasingly common? Well, you look at a couple of factors, and you have to look at it on an individual basis, including residence, where the work activity is substantially carried out, and the location of the registered office. And if you go for the state of residence, if there's substantial activity, if the individual is performing substantial activity, which is more than 25%, if not substantial work in that state of residence, you look where the employer is located, and you've also got to project forward for 12 months for that. Look, that sounds all nice and plain, and it's sort of based on the existing EU social security regulations. But what actually you need to do in practice, and it's going to be a feature more and more, is work out where people are remote working as well, and whether that's a new pattern of working and if it is, then you might have that all counts as to where you're doing substantial activity. And of course, you can see in the state of residence that actually, if people were previously working in London and now working from home on the south of France or something, then you can actually see that actually they could easily start having their state of residence in France and pursuing a substantial activity there. So beware. For the time being, places like France and Belgium, and effectively the UK, have said you can relax this extra stays in other jurisdictions, but if it's because of COVID and or state measures that follow COVID. Like when you've got to be a bit careful as to whether that is actually is going to be COVID, or whether that's, dare I say it, the new normal. We've been fined internally if we start talking about new normal too much now. But it's worth thinking about that. Next slide, please. Detached workers.
Right. Maybe I can join into a little bit of this, Jeremy. So this is when you get to talking about the detached workers, like you were saying. And that's also where it becomes quite interesting from a Dutch perspective, because there's a lot of cross-border activity between the Netherlands and the UK. The Netherlands is one of the biggest trading partners of the UK. Both countries are, heavily involved with expatriates. They say you can't go to any place in the world or you'll find a Dutchman and an Englishman there. So it's like this typical country, it's typical countries where you have a lot of expatriate populations. So we have a special interest in this particular paragraph of the trade agreement, and it is quite similar to the old rules that applied under the EU rules, but with a twist. Under the EU rules, when you were assigned from one EU country to the other, you could remain socially insured in your home country for a maximum of 5 years. Now, under the Social Security Protocol of the trade agreement, it's only 2 years. So that's a significant shortening of the period. And it can be difficult. It means that once you've been assigned for more than 2 years, you suddenly become insured in your host country for Social Security purposes. And you don't continue to build up any Social Security rights in your home country as you were used to in the entire period up until that time. So that can be a major issue. But for the 2-year period, you will be able to continue that Social Security in your home country. So if you go from the UK to the Netherlands, for instance, for most of the Social Security benefits, you will stay under the UK system. Now, what do you do at the end of the 2-year period? Well, in principle, it all ends. Then you have to become insured in your new host country, which will then be your home country, obviously, for Social Security purposes. But what we see a lot of people do at this stage is they pop back into, let's say, the UK for a certain period of time. And then they say, hey, you know what? Something strange just happened. I got assigned to the host country that I was assigned to a little while ago also. And that's always a bit of a gray area for the Social Security authorities to decide upon. You can imagine if you pop in for a couple of weeks or a month, they will probably think, is this real or are they just going through the motions? If you stay in your original home country for a year, then it becomes quite clear, okay, this person was indeed back in his home country and now going back out to the same host country. Any period in between that, it's a gray area. It really depends on facts and circumstances. It really depends on how the Social Security authorities will look at this to see if you can indeed get a new statement for another period of 2 years to continue social insurance in your home country. Next slide, please. All right, so now we have the transitional provisions, right? So all this started to come into effect on January 1st of this year. So you have to make a distinction between whatever happened before and whatever happened after that date. So here we put them on a slide, quite straightforward, I think. Before January 1st, 2021, you were still covered under the Social Security rules of the EU. So that means 5 years, you had your A1 statement, and you could continue for 5 years in your home country Social Security system. This will continue even beyond January 1st, 2021, all right? So you can continue for the 5-year period, you can continue on the A1, unless your situation significantly changes. If your working pattern changes, then you will, be in a new situation, and the new situation will be, covered by the current rules, which is the trade agreement. So yeah, that's what the second, box says. Once you're now in the new situation, it's been January 1st, 2021, you go on an assignment, you fall under the new rules. It's only 2 years. And the same applies if suddenly your situation changes from before January 1st to after January 1st. So the transitional provisions are not very complex. They're quite easy to understand. They're not very lenient or whatever, but that's the way it is. However, Jeremy, I think you have some practical planning points, triple P, on the next slide, right?
Yeah, so when you look at these points, I really wanted to just say on this slide is, look, the Revenue's published some quite helpful guidance on the 12th of February, just updating earlier guidance. And if you click into those links, or you can just find them online, what you will find is that actually they tell you the sort of the base rules as we've outlined them, plus also they give you the access to the relevant forms you need for wherever you're sending someone. So I found it really helpful, actually. So I thought it was a nice thing just to put on the slides. Yeah, so I think on practical planning bits, I think consider if the assignment can be less for 2 years. I think we should debate, we'll debate at the end whether we can do this route of sort of having 2 years and then a gap and then move into another one. I think, shall we specifically debate that at the end on? I think probably, and of course,
good for the
always internally, always reassess the cost implications. So next slide, please. Yeah, here's one that I just wanted to put out as well. There's a lot of wording in here, but really what I'm trying to say here is that even if you're not resident even if your company is not resident in the EU and you are sending someone there, you still have an obligation to pay the social security contributions. There's a little bit of a part of the protocol that actually mandates it, and already under the existing EU social security contribution regulations, you could have had a similar situation in terms of employer social security, even if you didn't have a presence in the EU, and vice versa. If some European company is sending someone over to the UK, they might actually have to do it. It's worth just remembering that, and actually coming up with practical ways to make sure that the payments can be made. So next slide, please. Yeah, just to really highlight that there are actually separate agreements, actually Norway, Switzerland, and Iceland, and actually there is Liechtenstein as well. Slightly on the detached worker rules, just slightly different periods actually. So Norway up to 3 years, Switzerland up to 2 years, and Iceland is up to 1 year, but then you can sort of agree with the Iceland authorities to actually extend it. So, and you have to look at the terms of the separate social security agreements, but on the whole, they're quite similar. But just wanted to flag that. So, next slide, please.
Can we move into another poll?
Go on, maybe you take yours.
Okay, then. So Jeremy and Don-Tobias had an interesting question. You were faced with a scenario where a UK citizen is sent to the Netherlands for 2.5 years after 1 January 2021. Would you shorten this secondment to 2 years? Launching the poll now. And this is not a prison sentence. This is an actual work element. Just about half the audience voted already in 10 seconds. I'll leave it open for another 10 or so. It's great. We're up to 3/4 of the audience having voted. I'll close the poll now and I will display results. So there you go, Jeremy and Don-Tobias. 48% say they would shorten it, and 36% would look into it.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's actually it's a very small proportion of people that are saying no to that. That's really interesting. Over to you, Don.
Yes, indeed. I was thinking that means that it's a bit of a pity, because apparently, if you take this example, there was a business reason for an assignment to be 2.5 years, and now it's the rules that make it shorter, not the business reason for this person being there. And it's always, I think, a pity when the rules take precedence over what the business really needs. So you can see, obviously, maybe if the difference was not 2.5 versus 2 years, but maybe 5 versus 2 years, that would be a different outcome. But again, it shows that indeed this reduction has an impact on really business decisions, and it's always like that, but it's a bit of a pity to see. Okay. In any case, the Netherlands again. Like I said, it's we've taken out the Netherlands for a reason, and it's that there's a lot of interaction between the Netherlands and the UK that always has been historically. So, like we said in the beginning, if you're looking at expatriates coming to the Netherlands from out of the UK, many rules will still be similar to the ones that applied before January 1st, with the exception that we just discussed, the reduction from 5 to 2 years. But there's another difference between the old and the new rules, and that is that family benefits are not in the scope of the foreign trade agreement. All right. So what does that mean? That may mean that if you are assigned from the UK to the Netherlands, you will not continue to receive child benefits from the UK, but instead might apply for kinderbijslag, as we call it in the Netherlands, or child allowance in the Netherlands, because they don't come with the continuation of your Social Security in the home country. Similar rules, but not identical ones, may apply for the Long-Term Care Act, which is basically what it says, the langdurige zorg, so people who need longer type of care, and healthcare as a whole. Again, these are not included in the trade agreement, and it may mean that limitations to the benefits will apply. So again, if you're assigned from the UK to the Netherlands, it may mean that you don't get the full scope of your UK benefits, but maybe you need to conclude additional healthcare insurance in the Netherlands. Now, I've used a lot of the word may in this part of the presentation, and the reason for that is that all of the countries would have had to put on their country's website additional guidelines for individuals as to how this will work out in practice. So the deadline for that was February 1st. We are now a little bit later, and the Dutch government has not published anything on its website yet. So we don't really know what the exact application will be of these, these non-included benefits. We can read the text as it is today. We can draw our own conclusions, but we don't have the confirmation from the Dutch government yet. It appears that the government in the Netherlands is very busy with COVID-19, so they tend to take a little less care of other business that's also quite urgent, and that's why we don't have the full clarity that we would like to have on how this will work out in practice. Jeremy, over to you.
Next slide. I think we're on to questions and answers. So, yes.
All right.
So, over to Michael, really.
Oh, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, we are indeed on to Q&A, and we've got some really interesting questions here. I'm not too sure. I'll try and start with the easy ones because there are a couple of complicated ones I'll read out slowly. So the first one's from Robert Bay. Jeremy mentioned some discrepancies between the UK and France regarding taxation. Are there some other issues, any issues not addressed you would expect to manifest themselves over the coming months other than taxation?
So that's the bit that I was referring to was the social. They have social surplus taxes in France, and so that's what I was referring to. So the main social security contributions in France are actually caught by the protocol, but then the French have slightly sneakily imposed a higher rate of social security taxes, i.e. the extra ones, onto UK people working in France, or rather they haven't given what I call the EU reduction. And then if you then think about the Netherlands example, where we're not really sure what the rules are, I think there's a lot of things that are going to come out. I mean, I haven't looked at it specifically, but you know, like the places around Europe that have church taxes or church social taxes, and are those caught or not caught, and the like. I mean, we can breathe a sigh of relief that the main social security contributions are actually covered, and so there isn't double social security, but it's at the margins, and sometimes these margins aren't actually that small. That I think we need to be on the lookout, and our French colleagues are very excited about this social tax issue because they think it's challengeable, and actually on similar issues pre-Brexit, the social authorities have been successfully challenged twice with odd rulings that they've come up with. So you can imagine the French lawyers are going, rubbing their hands with glee on this one with that announcement. But yeah, but actually don't forget tax isn't really the issue, because our tax, income tax, for instance, is not caught under the EU umbrella anyway. We've all got our double income tax tax treaty. So that, I hope, has answered your question.
Yeah, it's interesting. One point I make is that in the course of the last 11 months, many people I know have distributed themselves across the continent. And I know for a fact in Italy, in Spain, in Germany, Slovenia, Slovakia, and in fact the Baltics, I've got friends who have had the knock on the door. So this is not something to ignore. The tax authorities are very active, and they're somewhat as confused as we are. I'm also conscious, gentlemen, that you're kindly speculating on things. So folks, remember, this is not legal advice. Take proper legal advice. Because I think a couple of these questions here, you might want to speculate on the issues, and I'll leave it to you. So let's get cracking. Melissa Dunkley, if you started a 2-year secondment from the UK to the Netherlands in November 2019, and you have an A1 under the old rules, if that secondment is extended for another 2 years, can you apply for an extension under the old rules?
That's a very good question. Yeah, in principle, they say that the old rules will apply as long as your working pattern doesn't change. But indeed, I can see what you're saying is that you had an initial A1 statement for a 2-year period, and it runs out. Yeah, again, these are the type of situations that Jeremy mentioned just now. We don't really know what the Social Security authorities will say. However, as a very excitable lawyer, I can say, hey, it makes sense to argue the case that, look, my working pattern hasn't changed. I was out here before the deadline of January 1st, 2021, so I want my extension. How they will reply is not fully clear at this stage. Yeah.
Laura Fools has a question, probably well, for both of you, really. An individual lives in the UK and works for an EU employer doing remote working from home in London during COVID-19. Until June 2021, the EU are not applying the 25% limit. Is the UK also taking the same position post 31 December 2020, or is UK national insurance contribution due since he will exceed 25% in 2021?
I think this is one of the really interesting ones. At the moment, revenue.
I hate it when a lawyer says interesting.
Means fast.
Go on.
We say excited. I think the answers to that, I mean, obviously it's quite difficult to gain the facts just in a question, and we would probably need to look at it in more detail. But my expectation on this was that at the moment you could still argue that this is all due to the extra stay in the UK is actually due to COVID and state measures, especially as we're not really able to travel abroad at the moment. So I think, and the revenue guidance, and there is a specific guidance that was put out last year, said, well, actually you keep to your usual position, but you can expect to be told otherwise at some point. So I would have thought this is, probably you can take what I call the usual position still, but it is very rapidly as we come out of lockdown, that will have to be reviewed, because what is the position when you're actually not really subject to the COVID? And I think that's going to be a matter of national interpretation. So I think that's quite an interesting question, actually. So I think at the moment you're okay, but I think as we come out of the restrictions, I think I'll be looking at that to see whether this is a new working pattern. In Bakers, we are. Yeah. Actually, Don. In Bakers, we're actually spending a lot of time on new working patterns and remote working and the like. And so I think this is a what's his space one, and I think we are probably. I think you need to have a mindset that you're looking at everyone's working patterns. So Don, over to you.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I was saying you got to bear in mind that, for instance, if you're thinking about the situation where it involves the UK and the Netherlands again, the UK is really well ahead with the shots, the COVID-19 shots. The Netherlands not so much. So what is a new working pattern if maybe you're allowed to travel out of the UK but not into the Netherlands yet, right? Then do you get this discrepancy where the UK says, oh well, you're free to travel, so we're gonna be a little bit more strict as to your working pattern, whereas maybe France and the Netherlands have a different way of opening up their country, maybe not at the same time, maybe not in the same conditions and so forth. So it can really become difficult as we slowly get out of the lockdowns across Europe. Yeah, it will be hard to distinguish what is a normal working pattern and what is a working pattern that's still being affected by COVID-19.
All right. Well, Lindsay Sherman sent this one. And Laura, congratulations on an interesting question. Now we get to the complex ones. And I might suggest getting a pencil out, because Lindsay asked this early on and repeated it. And I've been saving this one. An employee employed by a French company. The client is currently resident in Hong Kong. The employee will move to the UK, say April this year, 2021, will live in the UK and perform 25% of his duties in the UK. Will he and the company manage to be within the UK Social Security scheme at the time, or still be in the French scheme where the employer is located?
They're obviously complex fact patterns, but my instinct there is he's coming over to the UK. He's going to be mainly working here, and he's doing more than 25% of his time. I would have thought that, with the UK hat on, I would have thought that the UK would be the primary social security place. Actually, I would have thought it would be the UK rather than France. Though I think I probably would want to explore a little bit more what lingering presence the individual has in France. I think that probably, if he's actually going to be resident actually from April in the UK, then my instinct is it's going to be the UK.
Well, I'll make sure to forward Lindsay's note to you with his email so that you can maybe consider it and get back to him. Okay. Got an interesting question from Sue Doran. Multi-state worker applications have no time limit. Should we consider applications under those rules?
I'll let Don. I can see him frowning at us. So that's Don.
Yeah, I'm not sure what exactly what kind of application are we talking about?
Just Sue's asking sort of more of them. So should we be making the multi-state worker applications under those rules rather than trying to do a single state application?
Well, yeah, depends on the facts and circumstances. Multi-state is multi-state, so at least you have to be in multiple states. If that is not the case, you will not be covered by those clauses. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm missing something.
Okay.
But,
well, one could, I guess, in theory, believe you were going to do something multi-state, and then it really wound up being dual.
Yeah. Then it's facts. The facts would then indicate that you're just, in a bilateral situation. Mm.
Yes, good one. Bob McDowell's out in the Channel Islands, and he's curious. Would either of you have any specifics here? Does this change the Channel Islands because they're not part of the EU anyway, or is this starting to affect them?
Donnie, you're going to look at me for that one, I guess. But the answer is I don't know. I haven't really sort of focused on the Channel Islands. You've always been out of it, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure that it will affect you. But there'll be some Channel Islands experts that will be really into that. So I wouldn't expect these rules to change.
It's interesting to know maybe that actually the Netherlands have concluded in 2007 a specific social security treaty with the Channel Islands. So you're covered under the Dutch Channel Islands type of situation. That's the only thing that I can tell you about that.
The Dutch are really tidying up. I know that you've agreed as well a treaty with the Scilly Isles a few years ago. So that was.
Yeah, exactly. I remember that. Yeah. The longest war.
The longest war. Yes, a question really from me. And I'm not being a lawyer, but might I apply the idea of force majeure? So some of this stuff is being forced on me, as you were talking earlier about vaccines. How are the authorities interpreting that? Are they being quite lenient if you're sort of stuck somewhere, or are they sort of saying, tough, that's not our problem?
I think places like the UK are being quite relaxed. So, both on the social security side and on the income tax side. But relaxed within reason, like it's within the framework of quite complex rules. And I think the difficulty is trying to work out what is going to be COVID related, where they give the right relaxations, but what's the small print as to what they're giving their relaxations on, and actually what is actually your new working pattern. And I can see, as we come out of lockdown, especially as we go into a new tax year, all this sort of niceness might just melt away. I think it's just, and people's interpretation of the relaxation, it's got to be quite careful, I think. Don, what do you think?
Yeah, very similar. We've seen in the Netherlands, but all over continental Europe, a lot of the social security authorities and also the tax authorities say, look, nobody could have expected this COVID-19 crisis to happen. We are going to treat you both for tax purposes and for social security purposes as if your situation hadn't changed. If you're unable to travel, we're just going to assume that you would have traveled, and we're going to base your tax status and your social security status on that. And it's just like Jeremy was saying, and it also came up in one of the previous questions, what's going to happen now that slowly things are coming back to normal? And they might be, like we said before, coming back to normal at different speeds and under different provisions. But right now in Europe, mostly the social security authorities have been saying, look, we're not going to make life even more difficult for you as it already is. We're just going to assume that you would have, that you lived the way you would have lived if COVID hadn't happened.
Okay, I'm going to try and whip through 4 questions in the short time available. Back to the Crown dependencies to a degree. This is from Deb Crouch. How is Gibraltar linked to the EU regulations? Are they considered part of the UK for the Social Security Agreement?
I think Gibraltar's got its own social security agreement. I've got to say, I'm not a complete expert on that one, but no doubt someone will be asking me a specific question on Gibraltar. So as soon as I get that, I'll be the expert.
And Melissa Dunkley, to what extent do we know or feel that the working pattern has to remain the same to continue under the old rules?
Yeah, it has been. I think that's the extent of the guidance we've been given. So does that mean if you change, one day that it is already different than it was before? I would again argue that you can take the position, look, overall, my position is the same, or at least very, very, very similar as it was before January 1st, 2021. What are typical situations when you have to consider, maybe I now fall under the scope of the new rules? That's when you used to work 4 days per week in a certain country, and now you're going back to 2 days per week, for instance. That's a clear change in working pattern. If you normally work on the Wednesdays and now you go on a Tuesday, I can imagine that you take the position, well, look, it's still 1 day a week, but it's just a different day.
Okay. Now, a lot of this has been directed at individual cases. Would either of you like to provide sort of a snappy piece of guidance to employers? What risks do they run, and what should they do other than be aware of it and the HR department is handling it?
I think there are lots of risks here for the employers. I think knowing where your employees are based is actually a really big risk at the moment. And the fact you don't have to have an employer resident in the particular jurisdiction in the EU, if we're talking about someone who's decided to go down to the south of France or wherever, is actually a risk. And we're finding funny things. I mean, someone asked me a query. They only found out the employee had moved to Singapore because the employee had actually asked for a new mouse to be sent to his new home address. I think that actually, as with all things on international mobile employees and people working, actually getting your facts and having a process for monitoring and a strict compliance as to where people are, and making it really clear. It's not really just important for income tax and social security. That is a vital area, but people could be setting up permanent establishments. They could be breaking regulatory requirements. Like if lawyers working abroad and starting to advise on various things. There's a whole host of factors, and that you just have to take into account. Now, so I think getting the facts, and it is always going to be the employer that is going to be mostly on the hook here, I think, because it's ultimately the employer needs to know where the social security is going to be paid, especially the employer social security. So I think this is primarily directed. Well, it's directed both to employees and employers. Employers have just got to really understand what their employees are up to and have a firm policy as to what they're going to allow and what they don't allow.
Yeah, start with awareness first. I agree, and a lot of issues to do with whether or not you've effectively created an establishment. It's really a minefield. But it's been really kind of both of you to share your thoughts with the audience. Just one final question from me. Given the way that the regulations have been going, et cetera, do you think this is something that will be cleared up within another year or two, like 2 cycles, and then we kind of know what it is? Or is this likely to be an ongoing source of confusion?
I would say from a European perspective, we have to get this right in a couple of months, really. There's especially when we're coming out of COVID, there will be so much international travel again. There's just no way. If people are insured in another country than they were before January 1st, there's so much that needs to be taken care of. Your payroll needs to be proper. You have to have these withholdings. People will claim benefits. We cannot just leave many things uncovered or unclear. So my positive spin on this, on this entire webcast is indeed we will get it right. and it should probably not take too long. There's just too much issues that would be serious issues that have to be addressed. So yeah, this will probably get resolved relatively quickly, is my expectation.
Well, gentlemen, sadly, we've come to the end of time, and I would like to say thank you. Got three rounds of thanks. Firstly, to our sponsors, thank you very much. ESOP Center sponsors, of which Baker and McKenzie is one, and to our FS Club sponsors. A reminder that there are a number of resources at the ESOP Center for you, including a weekly bulletin on employee share ownership and other subjects. So please avail yourself of those. My second round of thanks clearly to the audience. You've been great today. I love some of the complexity here. All the Q&A will be sent on to Don-Tobias and Jeremy so that they can get back to you directly if they wish. A reminder that we have a number of events coming up, particularly next week, which is rather full. And we start on Monday with Professor Levinson's book, Money for Nothing, which is truly a great read. It's why I wanted to have him on. But as ever, visit the website for events. But finally, and I can't do it justice, thanks to both Jeremy and Don-Tobias for your preparation and for your delivery today, and being so open and friendly about some of these difficulties that lie ahead. I hope, like you, Don-Tobias, it's solved fairly shortly. But I just have a feeling that seeing some of the questions here, it could run and run. But if I may, unable as I am to use technology to open the gates of applause, I nevertheless have prepared, and I have my Korean karmic clapper here, which will have to substitute for the applause you would have received had we been able to do this physically. I thank you very much for appearing.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much for having us.